McDonald.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. And I rise to also speak to this private senator's bill. I always think it's fascinating to spend some time in the chamber listening to the contributions of various senators who all represent different parts of the country. And I always listen closely to Senator Rice because she is always incredibly sincere and passionate in her defence of her region and the environment. I come from the other end of the country, in Queensland, where we have had a proud history of incredibly considered timber cutting. And so while Senator Ciccone made some representations on representing workers, I would suggest that that has long been the role of the National Party, is to ensure that primary industries, of which I include timber cutting to be one, be represented, and the certainty that's required for those people who are still operating in the Maryborough region, those people who are operating the Cape, the native title holders and Indigenous people of the North who are now accessing their own hardwood timbers, that they be given the rights and opportunities to develop their industries in an appropriate and sensitive and well-regulated environment. And that is something that I believe is in the best interests of our communities, of our people, and of course in being able to utilise the most renewable and sustainable resource there is, probably other than sugarcane, but is timber. And so I rise to support this legislation in its attempt to provide certainty, in its attempt to allow the men and women who are employed in the timber industry, particularly under the RFAs, to have a sense that they will not be held up or have the industry that they are so passionate about and work so hard in to be in any way curtailed. The EPBC Act is one that, as we all know, is incredibly difficult to deal with, and in Queensland, particularly in the far north of the state, it is not uncommon for projects to get to 7 or 8 years to spend, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in consultants' fees before they just withdraw and walk away from investment in our part of the state. Now, I think that's an incredible tragedy because we are crying out for jobs for those communities. As Senator McCarthy was talking about in the chamber the other day, of purposeful, meaningful work, and that only happens when we approve projects and allow for investment to go forward. And certainty is a very important part of that. Again, in Queensland, we had a timber industry that was so successful, so environmentally light in its touch, that the region was nominated for World Heritage listing. It was so pristine after 100 years of logging. And I speak to some of those, well, particularly men, who came out as immigrants from different parts of the country to go into timber cutting. And they understand and they know that country as well as anyone. They talk about which tree to take and from which direction. And during the school holidays, I took my son and we drove up the Kirrama Range Road to the Blencoe Falls, which was the old timber cutting track to allow the timber to come more directly down to the coast, to the mills, rather than work their way around the other Kuranda Range and other more further away roads. Anyway, beautiful. And it is impossible to see where those timber activities used to be because they have now been completely regrown. And some of the timber cutters tell me that if they went back a month after they'd cut, it was difficult to see where they were, but certainly 6 months or a year later, all traces of their activities were gone. Such was the sensitive touch that they had in that part of the country. And so I think some of Senator Rice's comments were, I'm sure, well made, but they're really better directed at the state government, the Victorian government, who is failing to carry out the work that they are required to do under their regulations. In Queensland we have a fully sustainable hardwood industry. It is highly regulated. and it is something that we should be incredibly proud of, is the expertise and knowledge of our timber workers and industry. But what they do require is certainty to know that they will still be able to operate in the months and years ahead, that they will be able to bring their children into that industry and pass on that deep knowledge of understanding the forests, the timbers they take, and how it continues to make it healthy. Previously, we used to have more fires and more events that would have managed forests and rangelands in a different way. As humans, we now try and stop that from happening. We fear fire. And of course, the result has been that we've got growth in different places that was being managed by timber cutters, by the forestry industry, and we are now leaving parts of the country completely exposed to the hot fires that we've had more recently. So I support this private senator's bill. I recommend it to you because I do believe it provides a sense of certainty for the RFAs and the people who work in them, the people who have deep expertise and sensitivity for the place they work, the communities that they live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McDonald.